This episode of Fantastic People is sponsored by Kinetic Realty Services, LLC. Kinetic Realty Services exists to help you find home. Their agents understand home is more than an address. Home is where life happens. It's a place where we experience joy and pain. It's a place where we make memories and build community. Their agents see more than a transaction or a file number. They see the person or family that home represents. Kinetic Realty Services executive sales agents manage the home buying or selling process with care. Kinetic Realty Services strives to provide timely communication, technical excellence, and tailored information for each customer and each home, making sure that from search to close, your home transaction is joyful and professional. Start your home buying or selling process today at kineticrs.com/info. Again, that's kineticrs.com/info. Kinetic Realty Services, helping real estate investors find success and helping individuals and families find home. And make sure you let them know that Fantastic People sent you.
Welcome back to Fantastic People. I'm Christian.
And I'm Regan, and here with us today is a very special guest, all the way from Sydney, Australia. Zachary graduated with a Bachelor's of Business and Human Resource Management from Western Sydney University. Also has a Diploma of Game Design, which is really what we're here to talk about today. We'll get into that more in a bit. And Zachary, how you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Now, you guys have interacted a little bit, correct?
tad.
I'm kind of the outsider here because I'm what we're talking about. But
a tad, yeah. So, what Zachary, tell us real quick, what is it that you are a fan of? What are we here talking about today?
Well, Genso Suikoden. It's my favorite series. Well, one of my favorite RPGs and video game series.
Yeah, it's Genso Suikoden or Suikoden. It is a early '90s Sony PlayStation game. That's where I experienced it. I know you can get it a couple different formats. Early childhood game for me.
Same here.
Can you give us a rundown, just a brief rundown? I know there's 5 iterations of the game. We don't need all 5 of them. Just give us maybe the first game explanation. I think that really sets the tone for the rest of the games, as they do operate in the same themes. So just kind of give us a rundown of game number 1.
So the first game, actually all 5 games follow this mentality and this structure to a degree, but with the first game, its story in particular is about a young boy who he's part of the Empire.
Mm-hmm.
But due to the progression of the story, he sees the Empire for what it is. He sees past all the beauty of how everything looks, and he sees a corrupt Empire that doesn't treat its citizens right. And not just that, also there are other things going on in the background. So there's that whole magic theme behind it, and destiny, and it leads to the protagonist going through this journey to get the Stars of Destiny and leading that revolution, and it is quite a ride from there. It's a short game compared to the others, but it feels like it goes for a long time. The bonds the protagonist makes with different characters and building up the castle. And the battle system for the time, I have to say, I've seen some early RPGs, but Genso Suikoden was pretty amazing because you could have 6 party members, and depending on where they were and their specialty, if they're a short-range fighter, medium-range fighter, or long-range fighter, it dictated what they could do and where you would put them on the battlefield, like what the formation would be.
Right.
It also was unique for having 3 different battle systems.
Hmm.
The dueling, so the one-on-one duels for certain scenes, the major battles, which at the time just looked fantastic and is still
Right.
fun
Right.
today. Yeah, and those, yeah, it was one of those kinds of games, just really enchanting game for its time, and even now.
Yeah, well, and I think the story, for me, that's what drew me into these games.
Oh yeah,
As a kid, the protagonist is a young boy joining the army, serving under his father, who's the captain in the Empire's army, or
mm,
general. Yeah, general. And discovers, like you said, discovers the corruptness in the Empire, the evil in the Empire, ends up uh, sort of getting cast out and becoming a, a fighter in the rebellion army. And then, spoiler alert for if anybody who hasn't played the game yet, sorry. And then leads that army. And then, all the different characters he encounters along the way, all the different, um, I would say, dramatic stories that he encounters, to then, of course, you're playing as this character and become successful. I think the story, to me, was so engaging. And at the time, for a role playing game, you could make choices, right? And of
yeah,
course, they were all calculated. You couldn't make the wrong choice, but it felt like that sense of you're in control and you are a part of this story. And that's the theme throughout every single one of the games. Um,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Zachary, I was just curious if you do you remember like the first time you played it?
Actually, I do. I don't remember how old I was, but like I know, I think that I was under the age of 10 because I thought when I was 10 that I learnt about Suikoden 2 at that time,
mhm,
but it can get very hard to remember the age. But I do remember the first time my brother had bought the game, brought it home. He bought a lot of games, but he brought it home and he started playing a little bit of it, and I was watching him play. I remember now it's a bathroom, but it was one time where we put before it was a bathroom, it was where we played video games.
hmm,
And my brother, he took it to the room, he starts playing it. I'm watching him play this game, I'm thinking, wow, this looks awesome at the time. But he only played like for a few minutes, and then it's like, yeah, like he was done just playing for the day. I think he just wanted to check it out. Next thing I know, I start playing it, get hooked on it, and yeah, played it. I can't remember how long I mean, like how far. I mean, I sort of remember how far I got, but it was this amazing experience. It was the first time I really felt engaged in an
mhm,
RPG. I'd seen Final Fantasy, but this was the first time I really got into an RPG. I think the 2D visuals really sold it for me, especially as a kid. I think when you're a kid and you see colorful, cartoony 2D visuals, it's a lot easier to take in
mhm.
compared to compared to Final Fantasy VII, which had a lot more of the 3D, more intimidating adult visuals at the time.
Right.
But yeah, I remember at the time it really set in. The game just was easy to play, and I really loved the characters, the personalities. Mind you, I was really bad at the game. Like, I hadn't played an RPG properly before then, and especially Suikoden with its unique system. So I was just like, how do I attach runes? They keep talking about rune. I mean, they show these rune shops. How do I attach them?
Mhm.
I didn't know how to do any of that. I was pretty much playing blind. And yeah, it was a funny experience, but one that I really cherish.
Yeah, I mean, just from an outsider's perspective, I'm just curious: is there like a Final Fantasy versus Suikoden kind of Stones versus Zeppelin type rivalry, because they're both like cult following RPGs for the PlayStation 1. So I don't know. I'm not familiar. It's when hear you talk about it, I naturally go to that place.
Right. Well, for me, I know that it's kind of like the Sega versus Nintendo thing for me. Like, I know I grew up in a family where it was the Sega mentality, but like with Suikoden versus Final Fantasy, in that sense, even though they weren't as much rivals as that, but I mean, just thinking about from that perspective, I was definitely in the Suikoden camp.
Yeah. Well,
Mind you, though, I had a soft spot for Final Fantasy, but I would say I'm definitely biased towards Suikoden. There are times where I'll like probably favor it over Final Fantasy. I think in the fan base, actually in the fan base, there are a lot of people that love Final Fantasy games. Like it's not all just Suikoden fans. Mind you, there are a lot of people that do say, oh, how they prefer Suikoden over other series. If I had to say though, I think Suikoden, the rival for Suikoden might be less of Final Fantasy, because Final Fantasy being a AAA title, it was always going to have a way bigger following. Suikoden's rival, in my opinion, is more games like, series like, I don't know if either of you heard of this one, Wild Arms.
No, I'm not familiar.
I haven't.
It's also a classic 90s JRPG, but it came out when Suikoden 2 came out in Final Fantasy 7. And they're both games with that have a cult following and are renowned for their unique features. And they also actually renowned for dying off in the 2000s. Like they have very similar stories. So they've got those passionate fans.
Yeah, no, that's good.
But
Yeah, I think, it's an interesting question. I mean, I know for me, playing those games, I for whatever reason, I didn't have access to Final Fantasy at the time. It kind of Final Fantasy 7, by the time I caught on to it, had kind of become like this rare gem that you couldn't get unless you had a lot of money. And we didn't have a lot of the used game stores. Of course, it wasn't really a used game at the time. So yeah, it's interesting because I had never played Final Fantasy games, but I found myself really aligned with this series with Suikoden. So yeah, I wonder if it's a great question. I wonder if it's a mix of both.
Yeah,
because
well, we have found most of the time when we ask a rivalry question, the people who appreciate the one thing also appreciate the other. Like, the attributes that attract you to this style of game, it's not just the game itself or the movie or the comic book franchise. It's the things that make it special, and a lot of those things are typically shared between what we quote unquote say are rivals. I was curious, Regan, do you remember when you first were exposed to the game?
I do, and I think I mentioned briefly on another episode, but so I had a friend, Jason Wills, if he's out there listening. Thanks for listening, buddy. He had the Sony PlayStation before I did. He was a few years older than me. And one day we were over there all the time. Came over in his downstairs bedroom, and he's playing his PlayStation, and he's got this game on. I had no idea what it was. At that time, I was 7, 8 years old. I had never really experienced an RPG, a JRPG, to really understand the concepts of the games. I was familiar with Mario, games like that. And platform games. Yeah. And, I'm just sitting there watching, and he's just so entranced by this game. He's reading the story and the dialogue, and all these different individual characters. I don't think he was very far. I can remember, and I'm not going to describe it because nobody listening is going to care to know about what part of the game it was, but I can remember the part of the game he was in and the characters that were on the screen. And yeah, I just became so entranced by the concept of this like action story that you get to make decisions. So yeah, I would think it's about 97 because it was one of the first games available on PlayStation 1 at the time.
Yeah.
And so it would have been very early on in its US lifespan. And then ended up seeing a copy in Walmart around Christmas, and we're writing our Christmas list, and so
Gotta have it.
Of course, I got to have it.
Yeah.
I got to play it myself. I hadn't seen the whole story, didn't see the beginning, didn't see the end, so I had to have it myself. And I remember writing it down on that Christmas list in the glass pane behind the shelf there, and we got it. We got it for Christmas that year.
Yeah, that's cool.
Wow. That's awesome.
And I still have that original copy. I'm a
Wow.
little bitter because the front of the case got cracked early on.
And that was typical with PlayStation.
We never got that fixed,
Yeah.
but I still have that early copy. Actually, no, I don't think that one's cracked. It's Suikoden 2. The case piece broke off, so it doesn't. The cover doesn't stay on unless you just leave it on there. But
the infamous cover art for Suikoden 1, though, that well, at least the US version, and I think the NTSC versions for the US and Canada had that cover art. It's kind of Mega Man infamous.
Yeah.
Like,
no, it is. You're right. Yeah, well, and it it's an art. The artwork on the cover looks nothing like what's in the game. Like it looks like real people. It's drawn, but it's like real people, very goofy looking. Like people just threw on costumes in a high school drama department to pick out what character they were going to be, and then they like took a picture, and that's the cover. But
like I can kind of see resemblance to characters. It's like
a little
they
bit.
got this vague idea. They looked at some characters and thought, why not just go with that?
And then looked around the closet to see what they had to make that character work, is what it feels like.
Yeah, kind of reminds me of what I did for whenever when I cosplayed as one of the Suikoden characters. I think that was my mentality. It's like, I mean, no one here except unless any of the audience who've played Suikoden would know Necklord the vampire. I dressed up as him a few times actually.
Oh wow.
And funnily enough, I did not buy an outfit. I just really used a suit, and I amazingly found some clothing in the house, like a red. Was actually not meant to be like a cape, but it had a black exterior, and on the inside was red, and I turned it into a cape.
Yeah,
so
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, I will say, mentioned cosplaying. I have yet to be at a con and see a Suikoden cosplay. I'm sure, I'm hoping maybe one day it'll happen and I'll be able to recognize who that person is, and I'll be the only one in the room that recognizes them, and they'll be just as excited that I did. But I haven't seen it. I have seen the games a couple of times. Twice, I think I've seen.
But they've never lasted the weekend.
No, they never. Well, because I always debate whether or not I want to buy it. I'm like, do I want to buy another copy just as a collector? Like, I'm not really a collector, but it's hard to find these. Like, what if mine breaks? What if something happens? And I stare at it for like 20 minutes and walk around. It's like, I'll come back. If it's there tomorrow, I'm getting it. I come back tomorrow, it's not there. It moves. But so that's what's so unique. What's so strange to me is that, I could talk to anybody around town. No one's going to know what I'm talking about. You say Final Fantasy. Yeah. If you've heard of PlayStation games, you've heard of Final Fantasy. Nobody else knows about Suikoden. But apparently at Pensacon here locally, there's somebody else that knows about the game, or at least maybe they look at the cover art and they're like, well, this looks like it could be interesting, and they pick it up. So it still circulates.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
Yeah, like
go ahead, Zachary.
Oh, thank you. Sorry about that. I've known a few people locally that know about it, but it's not the game people usually think of. Like in Japan, it was actually pretty successful.
Right.
Funny story, when I was in Japan to watch Australia versus Japan in the World Cup qualifier. I was
Oh,
on the
wow.
train. I was on the train, and I'm talking to someone. I mean, they had basic English
Mhm.
because it's not their first language, but we ended up, even though we didn't even really understand each other for the most part, we actually understood Suikoden. We were actually talking about
Oh, wow.
Suikoden on the train. And he understood, like, if I didn't know how to speak I mean, anything that I couldn't explain in Japanese, because I've got very limited
Mhm.
Japanese, I would just think, oh, maybe he knows the character names and all that, and he did. I think the names are very similar.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it was really interesting to be able to talk about those kinds of things. But as far as Australia goes and Suikoden, it's not very well known. I try and get the word out
Mhm.
there, but it's not an easy task. If you said to someone like you say about Final Fantasy, it's even if people haven't played Final Fantasy, they would have seen an ad
Right.
or they know it'd be one of the hip things to know.
Right. Well, and that's what's so interesting to me, in this age that we live in with the internet and social media and connection in that way. It's interesting to me, though, that, what you said about being in Japan and knowing how to speak very little Japanese, but being able to communicate with somebody because of a shared interest and a shared love for a video game, and to be able to
Yeah,
have that conversation with someone on the train is fascinating. To me, the power and the emotion that games with stories, JRPGs and RPGs, that they
yeah,
carry. But to further that in today's social media world, you know, I've never met you in person. This is the first time I've heard your voice, but for the last few years, we've been a part of the same gaming community on Facebook, and through our shared love of this game, we can interact with people all across the world. So, like I said, I could go to a con and not find a single person who knows anything about the game, but then I can pull up my phone on Facebook and communicate with thousands of people who
yeah.
who I've
Yeah,
never met that
that's crazy.
share the love of this game. So tell us a little bit about that. I know you're an admin of that page. What's that like, being an admin of not only a social media group, but a social media group of video games, and then more specifically a very specific
Mhm.
series or game that's not even a current thing? What's that like?
It's an amazing feeling. When we first started the group, it's called Suikoden Club. When we first started it, there were actually a few of us. Um, it was actually our admin from the US who got us together. And I
Mhm.
think I can't remember exactly how, but we got talking. A few of us, some of us, actually the majority of us are from Australia. Funnily enough, I never really thought about it that way, but yeah, but there were a few of us, and we decided we want a Suikoden group for
Mhm.
ourselves, and we got it started. And at first, the members were coming in at a decent pace, but now we've grown
Mhm.
substantially, and the responsibility has grown with it. It is an amazing experience seeing fans share their fan works. I've seen people post their own work in
Mhm.
regards to the series, like comics, like comedy stuff
Yeah.
where they comedic stuff where they'll have this short comic section where it's like the adventures of the Suikoden characters just doing random things, and you get people posting their drawings or sharing talented creators' work, crediting them and saying, yeah, there's this amazing work out there, and people showing their fan games and all kinds
Mhm.
of things. It's an amazing experience. Of course, there's the responsibility where we have to make sure we're allowing the proper content. I'd say for any admin, that's always the tough job, making sure that people who want to join like they're not spamming or
Mhm.
trolling. You know, that's always one of the big problems with any big group, I guess. You get people who come in like that, but other than that, for the most part, the group, it's an amazing experience,
Mhm.
and it's a pleasure to be able to interact with them on a regular basis.
Yeah, and it's a pretty active group. I mean, it's daily, multiple times a day. I'm getting
Yeah,
notifications of somebody posting something or a comment or a question, and I think that that's a pretty amazing experience to be a part of something that I've loved since I was a child, and to be able to connect with others across the world that love that same thing as much as I still do today. It's one thing to love a game or love a story or a comic or a movie when you're a kid, and then you grow up and you're like, "Oh, well, that's for kids," and you don't talk about it in your adult life. But
yeah,
to still be able to have conversations about this game, this thing that we love, it makes it feel fresh. It makes it feel new, like it's new every single day. And of course, the invigorating hope of a game six is always great, but also
yeah,
seeing the like you said, seeing the work that surrounds this game that others have contributed to me is special. To see the fan art and the stories, and even to see people streaming their game and playing the game and
yeah.
playing it with as much love as they had when they were a kid is great. But even to see, I think we've seen, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we've seen people come into the group that experienced it for the first time, within the last 5 years, within the last year,
Yeah.
which I think that's pretty incredible as well. Maybe like I've talked about at a con, it's somebody that just got a crazy idea to buy an old game and try it out, and
Mhm.
to
Mm,
see that is pretty neat to me.
Yeah, I was just
yeah.
kind
uh,
of to follow up on all of that. You know, community is incredibly important, and one of the thing that this podcast is really at the heart, or at its heart, is what it's like to be a fan and to be a part of a fandom. And I just, it's really encouraging and exciting to hear and listen people who participate in the
Mhm.
same fandom. And um, I think one of my probably my favorite attribute of fandom culture in general is hearing it build up other people. Like,
Mhm.
and listen to you guys, talk about other people's works and their contributions and cosplay and fan art. It just warms my heart. Like that's why we do this. I love community that supports each other, and it's just really encouraging and awesome to hear you guys talk about it.
Yeah, well, and I think everybody should experience
Yeah.
this game. And not it's simple. If you look back compared to games today, I'm sure kids playing games today and then going back and playing those JRPGs, it's a whole different experience.
Yeah.
yeah.
It feels very archaic. I can enjoy it now because of the nostalgia, really, but
Yeah.
the stories are they're worth playing for. Even if you want to look it up online and watch somebody else play it, and I've done that a couple of times. There's people that play the game, and you get to just experience the whole thing without doing it yourself. But I look forward to the moment. Hopefully, maybe my kids one day will be interested enough to want to sit down
Mm,
and play these games. I hope, and to see the opportunity to see them experience it the same way that I did as a kid is something that's pretty. I hope to experience, but I think it's pretty incredible again that it can be this timeless
yeah.
community, this
Yeah.
timeless um, thing that people love and should share in. Um, so Zachary, we talk about loving the game, but is there
Yeah.
any criticisms you would have for, obviously the game's been around for a long time and they're not fixing it, but
Yeah.
maybe the community, being an admin of a page and a part of that community, maybe you see the negatives more than those of us who are just participants do, because you get to say no to things being posted, or even out and about, like you said, in Australia or Japan, where is there anything that you would say could be better?
About just the community or also the games as well? Or?
Either.
Yeah, both. Either.
Well, I think the community is actually great in the sense that, okay, even though it can be easy to see with any group, I think it's bound to happen where you get issues. We've never had any issues that escalate. I think it's more of a miscommunication kind of thing, which is common in any kind of page where people have their own ideas what they want to see in a page, but you got to know what is going to work for a page or not, and you have to make those tough decisions. And I think, even though it's not as much a criticism, I think it can be in this. I guess it can kind of be perceived that there can be that clash with people over things where it can be hard when they don't understand why you're trying to keep it balanced. But for the most part, people in fact, people do respect it. And when we explain why we do certain things, people respect those decisions, which is always good. As far as the games, I think the biggest problem with the games is that they were all really on a limited budget, all of them. Like Suikoden 2, this is why I actually think it's an amazing, it's one of the greatest accomplishments in video game history, because despite its low budget, apparent low budget, it just was this phenomenal game. But all of the games had issues with their budget, the timing, but they all were functional. So I guess in that sense, it's hard to be critical of them considering that.
Well, and maybe we could hope, I know we all do, we could hope for a remaster, maybe down the road, where we can see things in a new light, and maybe also see things the way they should be. Those game mechanics that didn't quite work out too well, or a little quirky, maybe upgrade and improve those things to give us a fresh, maybe not better, but different experience.
I agree. And I think it's definitely possible. I think with the release of Eiyuden in 2 years, I think that might actually become the catalyst for those kinds of things to happen.
I hope so. I hope it gives them the funding to maybe be able to buy back some of these properties. And to give context to what we just said, the game's developers, the original developers of 1, 2, and 3, left Konami, the development company that created these games, and Konami still owns the property and is doing nothing with it. It's stagnant. And so these developers decided to come back together for the fans this year, launched a Kickstarter, which I think was the most funded, or the second most funded.
It was up there. It was in the top 5.
Yeah, top 5 video games and top something JRPG funded Kickstarters to develop a new game, Eiyuden Chronicles, that's being heralded as the spiritual successor to Suikoden, because they can't use that name. But they're basically doing everything else they can to make it another one as much as they can. And so I think that's something to look forward to, certainly, in the next few years, as the game is released and completed. And I think that to me reinvigorated. The community was already always a good, engaging, fun community, but that really invigorated the spirit of the Suikoden fandom, to know that it is going to become relevant again. And I think you're right. I think, Zachary, if this game does well, which it already has, but if it comes out and is a very impressive, successful game, my hope is that does one of two things: either inspires Konami to try again and be a competitor and maybe generate a great product under the Suikoden series title, or maybe they can release the rights back to its original creators, and they can give us that version 6 that we've always been waiting for.
Yeah, that would be great.
And you're right. The community is a good community. I've been a part of that Facebook group, at least in those thousands of people that are in that group. It's very encouraging, very engaging, very friendly environment, which I think is something we need a lot of in the world today. So, yeah.
Well, Zachary, we normally give people an opportunity to plug social media or what they got going on, where they can find them, where, if you want people to follow you, where are you at on the internet?
Well, we are on Facebook. We don't have an Instagram for our page. Thinking about it, I think that would actually not be a half bad idea. But if people want to find us on Facebook, the best way would be to but the only thing would have to be type in case they don't know how to spell the name. But it is called Suikoden space. I mean, like you put in a space then club.
Yeah.
Well, is there a way to add the?
It'll be in the description.
Yeah.
So just Suikoden Club with spaces. You can look for that in Facebook in the search section. So yeah, that would be but that'd be the best way to find us and to support the group. That would be the best way to do it.
Well, we appreciate it, and thank you for joining us. It's cool to hear people talk about a singular game.
Yeah, awesome. And we could have dug in way deeper, I'm sure, but that's not what we're here for. So, but yeah, thank you, Zachary.
Thank you for listening to Fantastic People. Please rate and subscribe wherever you find your podcast, and follow us on social media. That's at Fantastic People Pod on Facebook, at Fantastic_People Pod on Instagram, and at Fantastic People, no E, on Twitter. We'd like to say thank you to Alex Edmondson for our artwork and Charlie Hadley for our intro music. We hope to see you guys next time. Thanks for listening.